Great. Well, thank you very much, Katie, and to AfricArena for organizing this panel. I think this is a extremely interesting topic. Topic for today is data for good, tech for good, and how we're utilizing data to improve what we're doing as a business or as an organization, but also to overall improve the quality of life in the countries we work in. We have a very interesting panel today, both from the commercial sector, as well as those who are looking to serve the public sector, both investors and entrepreneurs. So we'd love to hear from them all. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Jim Chu, and I am here right now in San Francisco, California. And my background, I spent a couple of decades in tech in the US, that is, before venturing over to emerging markets, where I currently run a company called Untapped, focused on CapEx investments in emerging markets, in particular Africa. And we use data in particular to help establish trust and transparency to facilitate more efficient investments and keep greater accountability of investments throughout the entire investment cycle. So our goal is to make investing in SMEs in Africa as easy as investing in the stock market in the US, using data as the primary vehicle for doing that. So that's who I am, and I'd love to pass this over now to some of the panelists for introductions. Louis, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Louis. I'm managing a startup incubator in social impact. So we train, support, and mentor businesses with values of sustainability, impact mainly in the field of food systems. So namely food innovation, agri-tech, food tech. And we use data with our entrepreneurs mainly for two things. As you said, to bring trust and transparency on the side of the entrepreneurs, to bring more traction for funding. And on the second side, I would say that we use data for the end beneficiaries of our entrepreneurs. So the communities that will be impacted by the solution we bring on. Because we believe that, yes, data is trust, but data is also information, and information is power. So how to leverage power for the end beneficiaries through data and through transparency, as you said.
Well, great. I definitely will be asking you about some examples of that in a second, but before we do that, over to Adi.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Adi Ayel. I'm from an organization called Open Up. We're a non-profit civic tech organization, and our focus is around citizen empowerment and helping citizens be able to better engage with their governments and work together in order to improve their lives, and also oversee the work that government does, make sure that procurements are fair and properly allocated, but also work with governments. And our focus is mostly on local government because it's closer to the everyday lives of citizens, to work with government to better understand their citizens and at the same time be able to better serve them. We also focus on working with the media for the same purpose of accountability and helping them, rather than using their traditional methods of journalism, also introduced data journalism and how to use data to dig through, find patterns in what's going on in the world in a way that they otherwise couldn't. So that's our focus. It's a very interesting space, but very, very far away from the commercial space.
Indeed, however, trust and credibility are things just like in the commercial space. Trust, credibility, accountability, those seem to be very relevant as well in your space. Great, thank you. Harmony.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Jim. My name is Harmony Mutiwe, and I'm the founder and director of Bodza. We basically help companies integrate AI, automation, as well as conversational chatbots into their business processes. So the goal is basically to help them become productive, efficient, and as well as providing exceptional experience to their customers. So we use data for a wide range of services, ranging from helping companies make well-informed decisions in their processes, as well as improving customer experience or user experience. And then lastly, we also help them, help companies understand their consumer behavior of their clients. Thank you.
Great, very good. So we'll definitely be drilling down into some of those examples in a bit. Over to you, Carl.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Cheetah, and I'm an investment analyst at Goodwill Investments. Goodwill is an impact investor that currently invests throughout sub-Saharan Africa. We have 19 investments in our portfolio, and we are sector agnostic. So, yeah, and I think I'll be talking about a lot of our investments and how they use data to improve efficiency and in other ways.
Gotcha. Great. Well, again, we'll be drilling down to some of those examples in a second. So I think one of the things that I heard in all of your introductions is about the use of data, and several of you alluded to some specific examples of how you're using data or how the companies that you're helping are using data in whatever they're doing. I'd like to drill down into that a little bit more. A lot of people think, oh, data, it's just a bunch of numbers, right? What's it good for? How do we apply that? I think how data is then used to improve not only a process, but also to create that trust, credibility, and transparency is really important, and obviously done in different ways in different sectors. I'd love to drill down into that a little bit and maybe hear some concrete examples of how your companies, your organizations are doing that. I'm sure all of you have examples, so who would like to start? Adi?
Yeah, I can actually speak about an interesting example which speaks to information asymmetries, which is a slightly different take on trust. So we worked with, in the SADC region, so that's 15 countries in Southern Africa, and specifically with ministries of health who are purchasing medicines for various essential diseases, HIV, TB, malaria, and all sorts of other things. Surprisingly enough, it's benchmarking of medicine prices is actually quite difficult. If we wanted to buy some electronic item, we'd go onto Amazon, compare prices, etc. We'd know how much a medicine costs, the camera costs, or whatever it is that we want to purchase. But countries really struggle to find out how much they should be paying for a particular medicine, and there are many more complexities. And wholesalers and suppliers often take advantage of that. And you see, certainly in the US, the prices paid for pharmaceuticals is, like orders of magnitude higher than, we pay in other countries. But in a study of 50 essential medicines, we found the price ratio paid by countries to be, between 5, I think just 60% of all of those medicines. The price ratio of the highest to the lowest was 5 times, and in some cases even 50 times. And one of the problems there was the fact that countries just didn't know what they should be paying. And our work over a couple of years was trying to collect data, procurement data from those countries, and putting it into a database which is easy for procurement officers to understand. We found a really good example, and this is all using publicly available information, found that Botswana was procuring the same medicine as South Africa, exactly from the same supplier, same packaging. There was no difference, except they were paying 10 times as much. They were paying 100 Rand a pack for nifedipine versus 10 Rand a pack that South Africa was buying. And taking this data and showing the procurement officer side by side, you're paying too much. He was shocked. He just had no idea. And he phoned the supplier and renegotiated a $2 million saving just on the basis asking, why are we paying so much? And the entire project was around making sure that suppliers knew, that buyers knew what the prices should be, and thereby trying to level the prices in that pharmaceutical marketplace. So it's really about injecting more information into a space and looking to see how how the actors in that space changed their behavior. And we have seen some really good examples of prices coming down just because procurement agencies were, had the information to be able to go to the negotiating table and say, we're not paying that much because that country is paying less.
So that's a great example, but in your example, the information or the data was already available in various databases, and you were able to take that and aggregate and then put it into a more, if you will, digestible form. But in many cases, capturing that data in the first place can be very, very challenging. And I think one of the interesting things happening in the marketplace today is the increasing digitalization of various transactions and the ability to capture ever more data. I'd love to hear from perhaps you, Adi, or maybe some of the others on how new ways of capturing data is creating opportunities such as the one Adi pointed out, in market efficiency, whatever it is. But the actual data capture itself is the challenge that's being solved. Harmony, Louis, Carl, any thoughts there?
I think I can jump in here. So I didn't get to elaborate on this in my introduction, but for the purpose of a lot of these questions, I'll be speaking from the lens of some of the portfolio companies within our portfolio. And so to answer that question about collecting data, I'll speak about a company called Westnight Transport. And so what the problem that they're trying to solve is that informally run transport provides up to around 80% of all public transport in emerging cities. And on this, there's little to no information on the operations. And so what these guys have done is they're public transport business that they operated in South Africa. They started in South Africa, and now they're headquartered in the UK. And in their process, they have created an open data platform where they have centralized all of the data on routes mapped through, I think it's around 40 cities. Around 65% of those cities are informal cities. And the process of collecting all of this data has changed and has evolved in many different ways. Currently, what they've had to do because of COVID is find a new way to collect all of this data. So they've started remotely collecting this information. So they've onboarded they've onboarded data collectors using different platforms. Different ways of training people to collect this data, and they've started collecting this remotely, completely remotely. And they tested this whole process recently in Bangkok, and they were able to collect and map the entire city remotely. And so this process of data collection is something that is instrumental to their entire business model, and is also I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, that's a great example, and I think you alluded to some things there that I'd love to dig into a little bit more, which is the way data is captured in emerging markets can be quite different than how data is potentially captured in developed markets, in the sense that in the US or in Europe, there's not necessarily, the data is not necessarily used very well, but there's loads and loads of data being collected all the time, right? And well, there's an opportunity there too, but I think the challenge in many of the emerging markets, or perhaps what's happening in emerging markets, is all these different ways of collecting the data are starting to come about. Some of them are manual, some of them are automated through IoT, and so on. And that just creates a whole flood or pool of data for organizations like Adi's to really leverage and take advantage of. So, so your example was great, but I'd love to hear from Harmony or Louis about the different ways that they've seen, or maybe their organizations are doing, of collecting data that really pulls in what I would call the informal marketplace, and things that transactions or events that were completely uncaptured before. And then I'm going to preface a second part of that question, which is, what are some transactions that are being captured by these systems that are fundamentally different than the kind of data that's being captured in developed markets, right? Because there's an opportunity here to capture certain types of data that doesn't even exist in developed markets, but can exist in emerging markets because of the different way data is being collected. So 2 parts there. It's an open question. I'll hand that over to either Harmony or Louis to address.
Maybe I can start there, and yeah, I think that the fact that you're talking about information asymmetry and the fact that there's a different way to collect data in informal and emerging markets is really important. It all comes down to the fact that data is information for the business, but also information for the people that are giving the data. So in informal market, there are way more direct ways of collecting the data. It's either in person, if you are in contact with the person, or through ways of using SSID technologies, for example, the text through the phone. And the fact that it's a different way to collect the data is also an opportunity for newly coming businesses, innovative solutions, to really enter new market opportunities. Because there's a different way of doing business, and it's also an untapped market. If you come to the informal area, as it's a one-on-one basis, an in-person basis business, if you succeed in creating a system that can aggregate all those individuals, all those informal business together, you have a potential of, let's say, R1 billion market to be open. In South Africa, for example, the informal market is evaluated to up to like 17 to 20% of the total GDP of the country. So it's all about understanding a way, aggregating different individual at a really grand basis in order to tap to the masses. And in that way, data can really be a way to install a process to elevate from bottom of the pyramid to the top in a much more organic manner, and really give back information, give back data to the end beneficiaries, the clients, the customers. They have the power over their data. And a very concrete example, we are working with Shopit, which is an aggregator of Spazza shops. They are capturing data from Spazza shop in real time on their current stock in order to have the best prices and the best availability on certain products in real time. For example, if you look at the price of baby milk in Spazza shop, so in disadvantaged communities, you can pay up to twice the price for baby milk as you would pay in Woolworths in the CBD. And that all comes because of data, because there's no information on the right price point for those disadvantaged communities. There's no information about stock, about availability, and it leads to Spazza shop having to get their supply at a very high price, not in time, so they are short in stock. And at the end, the customers have to pay the price for this lack of data. So aggregating data, taking data on the ground on an individual basis can enable to access the mass and understand at a way more grassroots level the basic needs of the customers. And this is what is really important.
So that's a great example. So are you, is your company or organization, or are you working with organizations that are actually capturing that specific data?
Yeah, definitely. So okay. the one that which is aggregating the data from the Spazza shop. They have an app that they give to the Spazza shop, and in real time they upload their stock, they upload their sales, and then at the higher level on the system they connect to suppliers in direct time and to a network of delivery and so on and so on.
And of course, you're delivering, or Shopit is delivering value along the entire value chain. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing that, right? So they're delivering value to the shops. They're delivering value to the consumers. Ultimately, it's reducing the overall prices. Similar to Adi's example, making the market just a bit more efficient through information.
Yeah, there's increase of revenue for the Spazza shop and decrease of price for the end consumers.
Gotcha. That was a great example. Harmony, thoughts, examples of both data capture and how it's bringing value to the end consumers of the products or even of the data?
All right. Thank you, Jim. I think for me, I'll speak more around the commercial side of things. So we deal with the banks and the financial services, the insurance companies. So one of the things that we have right now that we've put in place to capture data, or rather to collect the data, is we developed a platform called Hazy. So Hazy is a platform that actually that streamlines a high volume of applications for entry-level jobs. So for instance, your bursaries, learnerships, graduates, and so forth. So what that means is we actually have given companies a single source of truth for their entire application process from end to end. So how we collecting data there, we actually, there are some companies that already have data in place, but they actually are not able to utilize it. So they don't utilize the data to their advantage. So I'll just give you an example, right? So like you find that a company has different departments that handle different things, different processes for talent acquisition. So what we've done, actually, we've put together all the processes into a single source of truth, whereby a certain stage or a certain process would be able to inform the decision for the next process. So I'll give you an example. The first one, the company would, let's say, for instance, for the talent acquisition process, a company would collect, personal information, academic information, and so forth, just to streamline their process. But along the way, sometimes they are unable to actually foresee, some of the, they're unable to make future decisions or predict, like they're able to predict certain things. I'll just give an example with one of the things that we were able to pick up, along the way. We collect every single data, or any kind of data. So no data is useless. So it's just a matter of like how the companies are using it, right? So we collect information about the demographics, engaging users as well, asking them about, like the simple question, for instance, where did you hear about us? That's a very simple question, but actually that question can go a long way in terms of understanding the demographics and also understanding, where the users are based. And then one other thing that came up around that is that question alone is able to, to inform the marketing strategy within the business. Because now business are able to make well-informed decisions based on, like simple questions or based on the data that is available. Another thing that I want to touch on is around the end users. So in South Africa, we have high demand of jobs or high demand of grads. Like the job market is actually due to the high unemployment rate. The demand is always higher than the supply. So what we've managed to pick up actually during COVID, it was there were time where where candidates that were applying for these graduate accelerated programs, these bursary programs, there were times where on certain stage of the application they were stuck, or there was no movement at all. And then we dig deeper into understanding what could be the problem, like interrogating the data, trying to find out what the problems are. And then we found out that actually at that time, but at that particular time, people were not allowed to move around because it was lockdown. But what does that? I mean, what that does actually, it affects the strategy. If the closing date was in the next 2 weeks or in the next week, they wouldn't be able to, apply. So meaning companies would miss out on, on potential candidates due to some of the external factors. But when we interrogate the data, we're able to engage candidates and then ask them, like what the problems are. And then that's when we found out that actually there is a problem. And then we went and advised the business to say, hey, how about you guys, move your, or, how about you guys, adjust your deadlines or your deliverables, because there's an external factors that are actually impacting your internal processes. So that's one way we're able to actually leverage on the existing data to troubleshoot future problems or some of the issues that might be internal or external.
So I didn't quite catch how you're capturing the data in this case. Are you able to convince your client companies to provide that data to you? They already have the databases, they already have the systems for capturing that data. Did I understand that correctly?
All right, yeah, no. They already have systems that are in silos, right? So
Okay.
when we came in, we built a platform that actually integrates with their systems as well. But all the data is now centralized, and then we give them a single source of truth, or rather a single view of their entire application process. So that's how we've
Gotcha.
helped them to capture the data.
Gotcha. No, very interesting. A bit over to Carl. I'm assuming you see quite a few of these different types of applications, whether they're investee companies or companies that you've evaluated. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Louis and Adi and Harmony had mentioned about different applications of the data. What do you see are some of the most interesting, innovative data capture business models and some of the more interesting applications of that data from the companies you've come across?
So I quite enjoyed what Louis was speaking about with regards to Shopit. I think that it might be because of the sector or the field that I'm in, being an impact investor. And I think that, focusing on those end clients, people that are going to shop at a spaza shop in informal settlements or rural areas, they often don't have access to go to the CBD, or they have to factor in all of these different costs. And so I think that one of the interesting things that we're seeing with these models is the convergence of different sectors. So we start with spaza shops utilizing an app, right? And they're inputting all of the inventory that they have in their spaza shops. They're inputting how many customers they see on a daily basis. They're inputting at what time these guys are coming, whatever it might be. And from that information, the Shopit will be able to say, okay, we know that we can, these spaza shop owners are able to pay back on these specific days. Now we can start potentially offering financial services or integrating something else into the business model. So to answer your question about what we see or interesting things that we see happening with these business models or data collection business models is that we see them spreading out and converging into different sectors, leveraging the data that they're collecting and being able to utilize that data to offer more things.
Right. I mean, when I say data collection or business models around data collection, very few companies are out there for the purpose of collecting data, right? They're doing something with that data. And so those are great examples. I'm curious, going back to Adi, there's just, from my view, and you see, I'm sure you're much more knowledgeable about this, Carl, but there's so many companies, startups, as well as more established companies collecting more and more data now. How can some of this data be made available in a civic sense, in a broader society sense, even linking it to public organizations for more insight into what is happening into markets? I mean, Adi, you use the example of pharmaceutical prices. Louis, you talked a bit about ShopIt as an example of looking at market prices for certain goods. Is there an opportunity here to bring some of that together, the commercial side with the public sector, to get better insight into how to improve certain market transactions or how to improve services to the population?
Yeah, so I think often people see data in a very one-dimensional sense. It was collected for X purpose, and therefore we will use it for that purpose and that purpose only. And one of the things that people are not doing is that, not digging into data sets and trying to extract the meat and the soul of it. So one example is looking at the company register in South Africa. So all the companies that are registered in the formal sector will have to register with the CIPC. The CIPC makes available information about the name of the company, the address, the registered address, and the directors. The question is, what can you do with 4 million companies registered in South Africa with a very small amount of information? We wrote a machine learning algorithm which inferred a person's ethnicity from their name, and then used that for a number of purposes. So the one purpose was interrogating business failures in specific geographical areas, and then taking that to at least one of the municipalities that we worked with, who we said, well, we looked at your municipality over the last few years, and we saw a high number of business failures, specifically focusing on young Black and colored youth. So we're saying, well, we see this in the data. Do you know what's going on? And then we worked back when these businesses actually started, and if there's what was happening at the time. And the municipality said, yeah, at that time we ran a number of entrepreneurship courses, and we thought we did a good job. But fast forward and looking at this data set in a way that wasn't expected, we noticed that we didn't provide enough support for whatever reason, right? Maybe they provided entrepreneurship training, but maybe they needed financial support or network support or ongoing. So the question is, can we use these unusual data sets in a way that is unanticipated? Similarly, using the same algorithm, looking at the City of Cape Town's valuation data, property valuation data, and looking at the owners. And we have data from 2009, 2012, 2015. I think there's a 2018 data set, and trying to find out what the internal migration is within the city based on the owners and also their race, and based on what we know, maybe in some cases, gender and age. And we can find out some really interesting things about social mobility, whether people are becoming more affluent based on the price of their houses, etc. So I think something that we overlook is the huge amount of data that already exists, but is completely untapped, and provides, if someone is willing to look, they can find a lot of information. Another example, also going back to the pharmaceutical sector, but not so much in the public space, but rather in the private sector. In South Africa, medicine prices are regulated, so there's a maximum price you should be paying. Pharmacists are not allowed to add a markup. What they can do is they can add a dispensing fee, which is regulated depending on the price of the medicine. There's a specific price dispensing fee that they're allowed to charge. And this data is published on the Department of Health's website, just in this long Excel spreadsheet format. And I think it's posted just from a compliance perspective, but for no other reason. And so we took that data and we put it in, we put a very, very simple web app. It's medicineprices.org.za. what you can do is type in the name of your medicine, and you can get a list of all the medicines that match, that search query. And based on the active ingredients, we'll show you the generics. So as a consumer, you can find the lowest price generic for your medicine. And unfilled prescriptions are a major problem in South Africa. So the first thing is, it turns out that medical professionals are using this thing quite extensively. You look at the analytics and you see someone arriving at work at 8 o'clock in the morning and throughout the day using it. But what's really interesting there is this transactional nature, where you tell us what you're looking for and we'll give you the price. In exchange, you tell us what you're looking for, and we can start collecting this data set of the most popular medicines or what people are looking for, and you start to pick up these trends around Ritalin and Concerta being I think in the top 10 medicines, the various variations take up the top 6 places are Ritalin and Concerta, which is fascinating. So I think we can take these public data sets and mash them up with other data sets and create new and interesting products, which just by themselves allow us to analyze what's going on in society. And you can use those for all sorts of purposes, whether it's policy development or whether it's commercial, the development of products. But then also at the same time, through the interaction with those products and those services, we can get additional information about how society works. And in this case, in prescription patterns, where I think in the US, it's much easier to get information about what medicines are being prescribed by doctors. In South Africa, it's so much more difficult. But the fact that we've built this really, really popular tool, which is used by healthcare professionals, we can get the same information at a fraction of the cost of what other companies are using it for, or getting that data from from other data sources, and we can then use it. We haven't yet tapped it for any particular benefit, but for now we have 3 years worth of data in terms of what are the demands, which medicines are people searching for, and interestingly, which ones they're looking for cheaper versions of. So it's the sort of information you could take to generic manufacturers or suppliers and saying, well, this is your competition. This is what people are looking for. They want cheap prices. Maybe you should be focusing on, on marketing this medicine, reducing prices, or whatever the case is. So I think, my point is, take data that already exists and do a lot more with it than you currently are. And I think that's, there's a lot of social and commercial value, using it without having to collect data from scratch.
Right. I mean, and Harmony's company is a great example of a company that's taking silo data in different parts of different organizations and pulling it together to create some intelligence around that. So I definitely appreciate that topic or that point. Switching topics slightly here. We had talked a little bit about in the prior to this conversation with Louis about funding and how it can be quite challenging to fund the development of the architecture or the infrastructure for doing a lot of this work. And I'd be curious, Adi, how are you funded, and how do you see the ongoing or the sustainability of your work and the funding behind it? Similarly, going back to Carl and some of the others on this panel, you've needed to obviously, or the entrepreneurs on this panel have created very specific business models around fundraising, to fundraise around. I think that's a challenge. I think a lot of the time we need to create architectures that go across different silos, as Harmony is doing. And it's really challenging to convince people to invest the money into creating these architectures that can do that. Right. So talk to me a little bit more about, or tell us a little bit more about how you sold this concept to your funders. And then perhaps I'd love to hear from you, Carl, on whether you have seen businesses that have been trying to raise money for a much broader data play, which can be very challenging to raise money for. At the same time, it can be incredibly impactful. So Adi, why don't you go first? Yes.
Right. So we're a nonprofit organization. Half of our income comes from donor funding. So usually smaller philanthropic organizations like Luminate or the Indigo Trust, but also Open Society Foundation. But the other half come from working on specific data related projects. We worked on a project called Voleka Mali with the National Treasury, which is making financial and budget data accessible to the general public. And there we competed as effectively a commercial company in a standard tender. And the product that we created was making data understandable and accessible to the public. But from a sustainability perspective, there's one of our focuses is open data and how it can be tapped for various purposes. We don't expect donor funding to be a long-term sustainability model. But what we have done over the last few years is really explored what the commercial value is of the data that we are that we're using and how to use it. And we have two different approaches. So the first one is we're developing a product called WASIMAP. The idea there is it's a spatial open data platform where you can, if you want to find out information about your municipality or your neighborhood, etc., we have huge number of open data sources where you can click on a map, go to your neighborhood and find out demographics, income, access to services, election results, etc., crime, health outcomes, whatever is available. The platform itself also allows you to add your own secret source data set. So if you are a marketing company, you have some information about consumers in your area, right? So load up that data set. You spent a lot of money, created it, put it up on this map, and then overlay that with all these other open data sets, which exist everywhere. And now you have a really rich interface to be able to interrogate a particular area, and then you can try to profile what the commercial value is of that sector. And this is a product which you can set it up yourself, manage it yourself, and it's actually it's already shown that there's a huge amount of interest both from academic institutions and government.
And this product is commercially available then, so you can, as a consumer or as an entity, you can purchase the services.
Yeah, so currently we're in a beta with 4 clients who are currently using it. We hope by the end of the year we'll have a proper version 1.0. But it is already being actively used. But it's one of those, we have those initial very sympathetic clients who are happy to deal with a bug or two and accept that sometimes things may take a while to be fixed. But in the next few months, we expect to be able to have an off-the-shelf click, there you go. Use it for whatever purpose you need to.
Gotcha, makes sense. Carl, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. What are you funding these days, and what do you think is the most fundable in terms of applied data?
When we look at how data is applied, I think, first of all, I'd like to start by answering it. And in more developed markets, you see VCs pushing that startups should get their product market fit and then focus on that area and then expand. In Africa, it's a little bit harder to do that because the infrastructure isn't necessarily always there for that to happen. So what we often see is we have I'll use an example now. We have a logistics company, perhaps, that starts off using motorbikes to deliver different products. And from that, they're able to gain certain data. It costs this much to drive, these amount of accidents, this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, they might move over to offering ride hailing on these very same motorbikes. And from the ride hailing, they're able to get this amount of information and expand because of the data that they're collecting. And this then moves in the same direction that we had talked about with Louis, with the convergence of sectors. This platform is now able to offer the riders loans to buy these motorbikes from them or work to own these motorbikes. the company that I'm talking about now is a company in Nigeria called MaxNG. And what they've done is they started by being a logistics company, and that was their pure core business. And from there, they essentially expanded horizontally and started offering different services. I think one of the challenges is you need to have an investor that truly understands what you're trying to do and can see the value in what you're trying to do and is willing to be there for that entire process, because it is a lengthy process to create that infrastructure. And if the data isn't there supporting the expansion into different verticals or horizontals, then it's not something that happens very easily.
More than once I've heard entrepreneurs in Africa, Jim, we can't we can't pitch our company as a data company. We have to pitch it as XYZ. So it's interesting here. I think it's easier to sell the concept of a data company or a company focused on data in the US. But obviously we need to find very specific applications of the data for being able to be business to be sustainable from a commercial perspective. We're starting to run out.
Earlier. Oh, sorry. Just to add on what you just said. Earlier you talked about the fact that these aren't necessarily data collection businesses. They're businesses that have a core business model, and they collect data on top of that, and then are able to utilize this data to expand or do whatever they need to do in a more efficient manner.
Right. No, thank you for that clarification. We're starting to get to the end of our time here, so I'd like to get one final word from everybody with around the question of in 10 years, what do you think will be the most impactful, interesting, profitable application of data that we'll see in sub-Saharan Africa? Who'd like to go first?
All right, I will go.
Great.
All right. Yeah, no, I think in the next 10 years, if we can have an application that is able to understand vernacular, that is able to collect data in different languages, that would be gold, because that data can be used for so many applications.
Great, thank you.
On my side, I'm dreaming of data collection system that can bring power and governance in the way people can consume and buy food, meaning a way for people to have choice in the way they consume food and not have an imposed set of products to them because of the barrier of price, because of the barrier of the geography, because of the barrier of where you're coming from. By understanding more the way people consume and the way people need to consume food, we can culturally adapt the food, for example, and revive, for example, indigenous crops that were once very important in the way people were consuming food in South Africa, and because of mass retailing and huge corporations, we forgot about this. But those are ways that are way simpler, way more sustainable to consume food, and data can bring back the information that is necessary to revive those ways of consuming. So yeah, a way more tailored way of consuming food and other products actually through data.
Great. Better food through data. I like it. Next, Adi.
It's a hard question. 10 years is a very long time.
How about 5 years?
No. But I mean, I think one thing I think which is interesting is not so much the data that we collect, but building the capacity for people to use it and to understand how to use it. I'm just looking at my kids, and David is 12 years old, and he's incredibly cynical. He's watching YouTube and he's watching the ads, and he doesn't buy into the stuff. He doesn't come to me and say, "Oh, we need to buy XY product because I saw the video." He will look at everything and be like, "Oh, they're doing it for this reason, or they're doing it for that reason, etc." The sort of cynicism that I only learned in my my late teens or 20s. And so I think what we need is to appreciate that consumers are probably going to be a lot more sophisticated in the future, because they have been bombarded by advertising for so long that advertisers will have to be able to have a better understanding of who their consumers are, and also try to make a stronger data-driven case for why their product is something that that should be purchased. So I think it's not so much can data be used better, but just recognizing that consumers are going to be a lot more data savvy, and so you need to up your game with regards to how you're going to be marketing to them. That's not exactly an answer to your question, but I do think in the next 5 to 10 years, that's something we need to watch out for, and we can't do business in the same way that we currently are doing.
Well,
business.
I think I'd applaud everybody being more data savvy. So I think that's a good trend. Carl.
I think that it's a trend that what I'm going to say is a trend that we're already on. The next 10 years, I'd like to see a lot of people at the bottom of the pyramid have more access to different financial services and different products like that. And I really hope that the data that all of these different unique startups are collecting provides that possibility.
Great. And just to add my 2 cents to the question, I hope that one of the areas that we'll see in a revolution that is data driven is around financial lending, and revolutionizing how both individuals as well as companies can access financing, because there is just better data out there. Forget the way we've been lending money in the past or giving out money in the past. We can really improve on how we're doing it with data. So with that, thank you all very much for your very insightful feedback, and thanks to AfricArena for hosting us as well.